now. Time is 5:15. I'm just going to introduce the moderator for the next session. I'd like to say thank you to all my colleagues in MNSM for giving me another honor to introduce another great personality. The next speaker is actually Meera Sivasothy. She is the General Manager of BFM 89.9. And the very first time I had the opportunity to hear her speak was during our dry run. And she's got a fantastic voice, fantastic composure, and wow, she's going to wow all of you. So just a teeny bit about her good self. She pursued a degree in business management in accounting in RMIT University, Melbourne, and has joined BFM 89.9 since 2008 and is currently the general manager. But Meera continues to host the health and living segment on weekdays at 4 p.m. And the thing that put a smile on my face when I read through her brief CV was the part where she states that she has enjoyed a postgraduate crash course in the business of life since joining BFM. So Meera, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Siti. Fantastic to be here. It's amazing, 270 people still online. I'm really impressed. Not too pleased with the number of questions, so I want to see more questions coming through because this is a session you really want to ask more questions. So first of all, good evening. As one of the speakers referred to all of you as the good doctors and the good lawyers, welcome to this panel session. It's titled Mental Health, Mental Capacity, Ethics and the Law in the Context of COVID-19 Pandemic. Now, it's a very, very broad topic. So fortunately, we had a quick discussion yesterday with all our panelists to sort of try and distill down as to what exactly we want to focus on. So let me just do a quick introduction. It's been a long 9 months since the first MCO was announced in Malaysia. And since then, I think we all know no segment of our society has been spared this distress and hardship. And during this session, we're going to focus on the mental health of the vulnerable communities during this pandemic and whether the law has provided sufficient protection for them. I think you already know the answer, but we're going to have this discussion anyway. So we're going to look at some emerging human rights challenges in lives and livelihoods. I think we've seen that not just in Malaysia, but around the world. Unemployment and food insecurity has risen. We see widespread closure of schools, which has interrupted the education of our, I think we have about 9 million students. Dr. Amar would probably correct me there if I'm wrong, about 2 to 3 million with no access to classes online. This has increased children's vulnerability to violence, to exploitation, and even abuse at home. Dr. Amar has already spoken about that. Earlier on, we had the session on women and domestic violence. Women have been confined at home with their abuses and are at greater risk of domestic violence. We also see the virus sweeping through detention facilities and prisons, and that's something Tan Sri Leelam Thai spoke about in his opening speech earlier on during this conference. So we're going to have this discussion. So focusing on 4 vulnerable groups today. We're going to look at the elderly. We're going to look at the B40 community. We're going to look at child abuse and people in detention centers and prisons. So since the pandemic, we have national and we've had state helplines set up by the ministry. They've received about 37,000 calls this year so far. About 20,000 of those calls were people seeking psychological and emotional support. Half of these people aged between 20 and 39, and 30% between 40 and 59. You can tell these are groups of people who are in their productive age. So this hardship, we know, if not mitigated, will heighten mental health issues amongst these communities. And question is, where are we looking and how do we help them through this pandemic, and whether or not the law can actually help. So joining us today on this panel, we have Dato Dr. Suarn Singh, Senior Consultant Forensic Psychiatrist. How are you, Dato? How are you today?
Fine, thank you so much, Meera.
Dato was the former head of the Psychiatric Services Division, Ministry of Health. He was director of Hospital Bahagia in Ulu Kinta and Perak. You were in the force in the government service for till 2011, Dato, and you also served on contract till 2018. So that's a long time you spent in the government sector. Joining us also, Dr. Gayathri Kumarasuriar. She's a consultant psychiatrist from Hospital Melaka. How are you, Gayathri?
Fine, thank you.
Gayathri she's also a clinical hypnotherapist. So if you're not careful, you might just, some things could happen to you during this session. She's contributed also to the medical ethics chapter. So any ethics questions you want to direct it to Gayathri, she's probably going to be the best person to answer these questions. Do we have Farah on today? Is Farah? Yes, hi, how are you, Farah? I can't quite see you. Farah Deba Mohamed Sofian, she's partner of Wong, Peen and Tunku, Alina. Farah has got 29 years in legal practice and has been involved in a very wide spectrum of non-contentious advisory work. Farah has a special focus and she's a trust and estate practitioner for both Sharia and civil jurisdiction. Welcome, Farah, how are you?
Fine, thank you. A bit nervous.
That's all right.
But thank God for your voice.
We have 270 people who will be able to help us through this session. So don't worry about it. All good doctors and good lawyers. Don't forget about that. Also joining us, Ramakrishna Tharini. He's partner of Ram and Lo. Rama was medical graduate who trained and became a lawyer. So you are a medical graduate as well as a lawyer, Rama. You never practiced, I'm assuming, as a doctor.
Yeah, well, I did practice. Hi, Meera. Yes, I did practice, but for a very brief period, and then the legal profession came calling.
Okay, all right. I'm assuming parents are all right with that because, all those years in med school and then, what, you want to be a lawyer now? What's wrong with you? But Rama's also ex-co-member of the Medico-Legal Society of Malaysia. So welcome to the show, all four of you. Thanks for joining us. And for you who are going to be a part of this discussion, please chime in. The Q&A box is there. I'll try and get through your questions throughout the hour. Now, we've heard so much since 2 p.m. I'm going to pose the first question to Dato and Gayathri. How do we make sense of this emotional roller coaster that people are going through in this pandemic? And we're looking just at vulnerable communities. We've heard this, Rasa Deba was talking about, people, it is an emotional roller coaster, some resilient, some not as resilient. But how do we make sense of this, Dato?
Well, Meera, when you are faced actually with COVID-19, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's so much still we are learning about it, so much unknown about it. So when you have a situation like this, the usual response that comes along is a lot of worry, a lot of fear comes in, a lot of insecurity, and then you will end up with stress. So these are some of the responses that come along. But what happens are your emotions get played along. When this emotion plays along, you get a bit distressed and may result in disability, especially when some of these emotional reactions can be depression, anxiety in later stages. Early stages may be a bit of irritability that comes in, anger, frustrations, and all that. So I think these are important to recognize in this period of time, and especially it's very challenging how to seek help when you land up with this sort of situations. So especially with the new challenge, we have a lot of new relatives that come along, I think, or what we call it the new norm. So it affects many people in this situation, as you say, that many fellows are working from home. There is also lack of physical contact with your friends, especially in office. Very therapeutic when you meet your friends to talk about it. For children, as pointed out by Amma, they're staying at home. Problem of abuse, interest in learning, all these issues are coming up. Parents who find that when children are away at school, they have got a break time for themselves. They're getting interactions with children, a lot of issues along this, which land up with abuse, risk of abuse. And I think sometimes this is my own personal feeling, that government doesn't really help us when they make lack of apparent transparency. Many of us feel around this. When there's lack of transparency and you get conflicting messages coming through, sometimes U-turns, this increases your anxiety and result in poor mental health. So these are some of the psychological issues that come along. I'm not touching on the social and financial, I mean, just psychological issues. Okay, there are many. And I think important thing is to recognize them first. And maybe Gayathri would like to carry on from there or add on that.
Gayathri?
Yeah, so we are now already in our third wave, and from the MCO we have gone into the CMCO, came out of it, now CMCO again. So this is very confusing, not only for children but also for adults, financial insecurity. So the household, everything has changed now. Everything has changed. The dynamics has changed. Parents who are going out to work, now they're staying at home, financial issues. Children are witnessing, parents getting distressed, and children, I mean, their support is parents. And they also, they thrive with social interactions, right? Now that's being restricted as well. And just like what Dato Amar said just now, the closing of schools is actually, it's not very helpful for these kids because they lack the social interactions. They go to school, they sit, they talk to their friends, they play. They're at home, they're confined to their rooms, they're confined to the laptops, classes are online, they surf the line, and all sorts of other dangers come in as well. As they're surfing the line, God knows what's happening. Parents are outside doing their work on their laptops and monitoring and so on and so forth. So yes, emotional problems are high, psychological problems are not, and we're seeing that there is a rise, in the number of cases that are coming to us. But what the psychiatrists in Malaysia, in the Ministry of Health, what we are all doing, so I'm speaking on behalf of all of us, is that we're doing everything we can. We have got psychological first aid set up in every hospitals, and we go down to the community. We have community mental health centers, which we try and see where we can reach out, helplines, and so on and so forth.
Okay. We will never have enough psychiatrists and psychologists, Gayathri. And I think we always think it's the government's problem, right? We will never have enough of your people in these areas. What's a possible solution?
What's a possible solution? Like you rightly said, Meera, we will never have enough. This problem is going to escalate, and it's not going to stop when COVID stops. God knows when it's going to stop, but the effects will be, it will be longer. It will take longer. Psychological effects, it takes much more longer to settle. What would be good is if we can get more NGOs to work with us, because definitely we can't do it alone. We need to work together. So, empowering NGOs to work with us would probably be really helpful as well.
What's stopping that process at the moment?
Well, I suppose, there are NGOs that are coming in to help us, right? But, there are a lot of other, administrative things. And sometimes it's also stigma. I'm not saying that there are no NGOs that come in to help those who are mentally ill, but I think a lot of NGOs focus more on physical handicaps, on children, whereas the mentally ill tend to be a little neglected. Well, that's the truth. And stigma, discrimination plays a role here. And I suppose there are a lot of times where the families of people who have mental illness, they don't come forward either, because stigma, one. The other thing is cultural beliefs. We are very embedded in our culture. Somebody has charmed or, demonic possessions, or, denial is another thing. It can't be, maybe I'm depressed, but no, I'm too strong. So, mental illness is, equated to being weak. So these kind of concepts, a lot more needs to be done, Meera. We're doing, but it's definitely not enough.
Okay. Farah and Rama, what are current laws in place as far as mental health is concerned? Farah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to start with the fact that we have a Mental Health Act to begin with, we also have the Person with Disability Act, yeah, but they work hand in hand. But having said that, if you look at, for a start, mental health is a very, very big word. And to begin with, we no longer use the word lunatic. We have now changed that word from being a crazy person or lunatic to a mental illness, right? And the law have changed that terminology to avoid this stigma. Am I right, doctors? So I think you will see that, right? So as far as the law is concerned, we have the Mental Health Act, and if only we have other laws that could complement the Mental Health Act, one of which is the Mental Capacity Act, which other countries have had. So I think because mental health act is so wide in nature, in the sense that, you know, it in the context of pandemic, the way I see it is there are three parts to it. There are three ways I look at it. One is meant for the abuser. Of course, we always talk about the abused, yeah, the victims of the domestic violence. But I think we can also use Mental Health Act, particularly the Section 10, involuntary admission of a person into the psychiatric hospital. I believe we could use that to help and to help our victims and also our abuser. That's how I see it, you know, in that context. Maybe Rama, you might want to expand on that.
Right. Well, the Mental Health Act really was formulated for essentially one specific purpose, which was for the treatment of mental disorders, right? It is not there to address other issues such as personal welfare decisions or financial decision making or consenting or rather decisions in regard to medical care, for example. These issues currently have no legislation in Malaysia at the moment. Coming back to the Mental Health Act, it is actually a very comprehensive piece of legislation for what it is intended to do, which is for the treatment of psychiatric disorders, or using the wording of the Act, mental disorders. But of course, its scope is rather focused and limited. So that throws up a whole host of other issues. So in summary, we could say that the statutory scheme of mental health legislation in Malaysia at the moment is very limited. And we have seen how the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the spotlight on how isolated and vulnerable certain segments of the population are, and particularly those who lack mental capacity, and I'm specifically referring here to adults with vulnerabilities. So, you know, can you imagine if you're cut off from your family members and there's no one in place to, you know, make relevant decisions, for example. So this again, like what Farah was saying, this again highlights the need for the introduction of a a Mental Capacity Act.
Maybe we can add on to that, Rama and Farah, because I think the Mental Health Act basically doesn't handle capacity at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't handle capacity at all.
Yes.
Only thing, to use the Mental Health Act, the person has to be adjudged to be mentally disordered under the law first. Yes. Only then you can apply Section 52 of the Mental Health Act. That is basically for court may order the inquiry as a High Court. And then Section 54 is power to examine a person alleged to be mentally disordered.
Yeah.
Right? So that doesn't touch on capacity again. So it is, as rightly pointed out, that Malaysia does not have this act, and we need one, because especially it is showing up now in the time of COVID, when people who get admitted into hospital who are positive, okay, there's a lot of fear of imminent death that comes in along with that. And that's the time to start thinking, oh my God, when I may lose my capacity, should I have done this if we had a law to put this in place as making a living will, or basically to handle this issue before I lose my capacity. And we don't have one that, because capacity, again, mental Health Act does talk about mental capacity, but there's no definition per se in the Act itself. I mean, this is my view on Mental Health Act.
Dato,
If I
you
may
mentioned, sorry, you mentioned the other day when I spoke to you, the mental capacity law has been sitting in the back burner for a while. Do we know why?
I don't know why. I think maybe there is no need. I think people, maybe generally, if I may say, the legislators don't feel the need to do so, to quickly create a new law. If you look at the Mental Health Act, it was dated, it's actually Mental Health Act 2001. But do you know that it was only made effective in 2010? That was 9 years later, when the regulations actually came into place as well. So now 10 years ahead, notwithstanding that people have been talking about Mental Capacity Act and Singapore have gone on ahead, they already have their Office for Public Guardians, UK have gone ahead, Australia has got it. We are still struggling, right, doctors? So I'm not quite sure why. Maybe because they don't think that it is relevant. I must say, not having Mental Capacity Act has robbed us, everybody, basically everybody, it has robbed us the right to plan ahead. That is where I feel that we actually need, and particularly now, you've got people who cannot rely on their family anymore. There are single persons living alone in isolation, and they have no one to turn to. The law allows them to find a friend or a relative, right? But beyond that, they can't go to anyone to appoint someone to manage their affairs, to manage their welfare. Whereas if we could take the experiences of Singapore, they allow professional donee or professional deputies to attend to a person who is mentally disordered, or when they become mentally disordered, and they can plan ahead, so they can appoint by way of lasting power of attorney. Our Power of Attorney Act doesn't allow that. There's a lot of debate about whether the Power of Attorney Act you can appoint someone, but if you read carefully the spirit of the law in there, it doesn't actually allow the donor to appoint beyond his life. So if you look at the Power of Attorney Act, the provisions clearly say that it goes with the bankrupt, it goes with the person who's incapacitated or who have lost incapacity, and it goes with death, unless you have valuable consideration. And if you look at the definition of valuable consideration, is very subjective. Now, what I mean here is, if it is wrongly drafted, where do you stand then? You are already incapacitated.
Sure, we'll go through areas in which Mental Capacity Act could have made a difference, because we're going to look at the 4 vulnerable groups. But just to answer the first one question online, if the budget 2021 is passed, how will the funds allocated for mental health be used to tackle the psychological impact of this current pandemic? Well, sad news is the budget for mental health services and infrastructure saw a 61% reduction for budget 2021. So I really don't know how it's going to get any better. If ever, it's probably going to get worse, because it's a lot less. And this is the lowest ever monetary allocation towards mental health services and infrastructure. So you see where our priorities actually stand at the moment. We're going to go to the elderly now. Can we just try and understand this vulnerable group? They are a high-risk group when it comes to mental health issues, even ordinarily. 15 to 20% of them have depressive disorders. What have been some of their challenges during this pandemic? Gayathri, do you want to take this one?
So basically, the risks are the same, but it's become higher, especially for those of them who are staying in nursing homes. What we have done in general, most of the psychiatric departments for our patients who are elderly, is we have reduced their coming to the clinic so that they don't get exposed. And we actually work with their family members or caregivers to actually send their medications or get people to come over and collect the medications. and we give them support through the phone if necessary, unless there's something that is, unless they're really ill, then we get them to come in. But definitely they are at higher risk. And we're more concerned about those of them who are definitely depressed and those who are having dementia, because the risk of dementia is higher in those who are above 65, and it goes on, and in these population, they're more vulnerable to developing, to being exposed to COVID. So we also inform family members to take care, to make sure that, they are careful when they go and visit them in nursing homes. But we advise them to go and visit, but take proper precautions, because this group is already isolated and we do not want them to be neglected, or, I'm not saying that they're going to be abused, but the risk of abuse would be higher if the family members don't go and visit them in the nursing homes.
What sort of cases are you seeing, Gayathri?
We see, in the elderly, we see depression, we see dementia, and we also see schizophrenias, as well as those of them who have bipolar mood disorders.
Okay. Yeah, and what are some ethical issues that this group faces, given where they are, their age, and then given all this social isolation, lack of social interaction, they're falling ill, they can't get help, they're in care homes, nobody can visit them. What are some of the ethical issues that this group faces?
That we would probably face with the autonomy, the ability to make decisions for themselves. So this is where we, advanced directives and all these things are important, which we don't have. So when they're at this age, we can't, when in this stage, it's the family members or the carers who make decisions on their behalf. And honestly, we really don't know whether it's really what they want, because they're in a state, if they're depressed to a certain extent, we can, sort of get them to talk to us and tell us, look, I don't want this, I don't want that. And we discuss with them and ask them what are their options. And we, but when they are in a state like dementia where they can't remember, we just do what we feel is, best in their best interests with what their family wants. Okay. So those are the ethical. So I think basically it's the autonomy that is lost in them.
Okay. We have a question here from Li Chong. How would Malaysia move forward?
Can I add on Meera to that, on nursing?
Okay, sure, Dato, go ahead.
Sorry, because I think we must be clear, because quite a number of elderly are in nursing homes that comes under the Care Centres Act. Right? And I think regulation of these care centres are important because they come under the purview of the Social Welfare Department. We find a lot of them are mushrooming, but not well regulated. Not well regulated. There's not enough therapy sessions for the elderly. They basically provide just a roof over their head. I think we need to look further before they deteriorate further. As for patients with mental disorders or kept in a nursing home, the Mental Health Act provides, it comes under the purview of Mental Health Act, where there is a psychiatric nursing home, which has got its own criteria. So you can have a government psychiatric nursing home or a private psychiatric nursing home. So it doesn't come under the Care Centres Act. So we need to relook back, and I'm not sure how many are run legally along that line and how are they regulated. And so priority, I think we really have to relook back into this area, because there are many patients with mental disorders, especially the elderly who are kept in nursing home. So for the carers, it might be, well, out of sight, out of mind for a while. But I think it's important what goes on care-wise, especially for the elderly in nursing home, if they are kept in general nursing home. I think that's my point.
Do we have a Care Centres Act, Dato?
Care Centres Act, maybe our lawyers, Farah or Rama can say, because it comes under the preview of the Care Centres Act, I think, for nursing homes. Yeah.
Yes, we do have a Care Centres Act. But what happens is, because not all patients with mental health issues are cared for in these centers, many of them are, as Dato Suarn pointed out, in nursing homes and other centers which come under the purview of the Private Healthcare Facilities and Services Act 1998, which the enforcement of which comes under the purview of the Ministry of Health and not the Ministry of the exact name doesn't come to mind now. So yes, so there's a bit of, or rather, the jurisdiction over these sort of centers are sort of split up into across multiple ministries.
Okay, are there gaps in this act, do you think, Rama?
Well, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not familiar with the Care Centres Act, so I haven't gone through the provisions in detail. For centres that come under the Private Healthcare Facilities and Services Act, they're actually rather quite detailed provisions, and they're quite rigorous actually in terms of the regulations that these centres need to comply with. But of course, then again, the question of enforcement is always there. You see whether enforcement is up to par.
There's a question from Lee Ai Chong. How would Malaysia...
Maybe if I add on, for government nursing home, or sorry, Meera.
No, go ahead.
For government nursing home or government psychiatric nursing homes, you need funding. I think funding is lacking. So if there is sufficient funding, then most of these centers will do better. Especially those under the Ministry of Social Welfare. They don't have enough funding, they don't have enough trained human resource to handle the elderly there. And with COVID-19, I think prior to COVID-19, it was bad, and now it is worse. Right? So I think enforcement is equally important. Funding is equally important for this, for the elderly.
Yeah. I've always said, it's amazing how we take this so lightly. We are going to be an aging nation in the year 2030, and we're still not taking it seriously enough, and all you need is a pandemic like this to just throw everything off. It's just very, very frustrating. Question from Lee Chong. Finally, I get to your question. How would Malaysia move forward with efforts to bring advanced care plans or advanced directive for people interested to state their wishes? Where do you think we should start? Farah, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it goes with, I think it's a given that we really need to have a mental capacity act or mental incapacity act, whatever it is. But the point is, it is meant to address capacity, unsoundness of mind. What are the tests instead of relying on principles, right? Dr. Singh. So basically, I think we really have to find the political will to actually formulate all these laws so that advanced directives are actually not binding. So we don't want it to be left in a letter of wishes, and then the family decide who's, whether it's binding or not. Doctors don't know how to move on with it. I think from the practical point of view, I think doctors are having a lot of problem with that as well. But if, for example, we have a particular law to address that, at least, there's proper guidance, and we know exactly what can and cannot be done. And there's a lot of stages in to the end of life, right? I have not seen one. I mean, I've gone through it with my mother, but there were just so many stages. So I cannot imagine what the doctors go through in trying to actually address these issues. What is valid and binding? What instructions you have to take? At which point, they can rely on it. So I must stress that as a lawyer who actually does I actually do the estate planning. Yeah, so I'm not quite I don't do much medical law, unlike Mr. Rama, who's actually a doctor and then become lawyer. So I do estate planning. From that angle alone, right, we do have a problem. As I mentioned just now, we are robbed of our ability and our right to plan. Now, do we want to leave it to our children to decide whether we actually want no resuscitation or is it the decision of the doctors? The other thing that I would like to highlight, under the current law, mental capacity is actually not for the doctors to determine. It's for the court actually to decide based on evidence. So as it is, we've got medical professionals who are looking at it from scientifically, and yet we leave that to the courts. With due respect, whether we lawyers and judges are even fit to talk about it, to even discuss about it, and say whether to declare someone is mentally unfit. So yeah, that's my point.
Dato, that's your area of specialty. Whether or not lawyers or should the courts or doctors have the last say?
No, maybe a comment on that. I'm quite familiar with the Mental Health Act and this. And I think it's important because Section 54 of the Mental Health Act says you can give your opinion. It mentions there are 4 areas you have to inform to the court. Ultimately, the court decides. Your professional opinion is given to the court in your report. And again, it comes to the High Court judge. But what happens is ultimately, it's your opinion, that's all, on that particular time when you're examining. And again, we know that mental health, sometimes capacity can fluctuate. It can be a temporary loss of capacity, it can be permanent. So the issue is when it's temporary, we would like to treat the individual until he's well, enough of he has capacity to do. The Mental Health Act, unfortunately, only touches on consent. Section 77 of the Mental Health Act touches only on consent for surgical procedures, other procedures. And to use the Mental Health Act, you must be mentally disordered first. And the Mental Health Act have defined mental disorder in Section 2 of its definition. So it's very specific. You can't use Mental Health Act on I can't use Mental Health Act on myself if I'm not mentally disordered. The day I become mentally disordered, yes, you can use that issue of consent.
Yeah.
And they're quite specific there. So for Section 77 talks about emergency procedures and non-emergency procedures.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference.
Sure. We're going to let go of the elderly for a while and move on to the B40 community. My God, we've got 2 more to go. This group of people, their biggest challenge has been higher rates of unemployment, higher rates of dependence on insecure self-employment. This continued financial insecurity is driving poor mental health in this community. Many of them have existing mental health problems, some developing mental health issues. How have we approached mental health issues amongst this community, Dr. Gayathri?
Okay. We're doing, like I said, we're doing what we can, whatever we can. And, we have got mental health, community mental health centers in each state, and some states, like for example, Selangor, we have 4, Kedah, we have 2, Sabah, Sarawak. So these centers are right smack in the midst of the community, and it's they just walk in. They can just walk in, and come in anytime during office hours. That's it. That is. We also have primary health centers where they just go and pay a ringgit. And honestly, it's just a ringgit, but if they don't have the money, they're not going to be deprived. They're still entertained. And in every primary health center that we have medical officers, and some of the bigger ones have family medicine specialists who are also trained to see psychiatric patients. Now, should the problem be more serious, they are referred to us in the tertiary centers. Yes, it is rising, it's becoming more, but we also, what we do is we work with the social welfare department, and under the Orang Upaya Mental, OKU Mental, many of them actually are given financial aid, right? And if they work, they're given an incentive, and there's a higher. So for those of them who are under the financial aid, group, they have some amount of money, but it's definitely not enough, Meera. And they are definitely suffering. Their children are suffering as well. So what we have done, and I'm sure this is something that most of my colleagues have done in the other departments, is we work with some of the NGOs, and we actually, go and give them hampers. We sort of identify the real hardcore poor amongst them, and we work together and we go and give them evaluations and so on and so forth. But we don't know how long we can, do that, and we definitely need help.
Can the law help in any way, Dr. Rama and Farah?
You are referring to the treatment of those in the B40 group?
That's correct.
Right. I mean, this would of course require far-reaching legislative reform in terms of access to healthcare and and also from the economic point of view, distribution of resources. Will that be an immediate priority? I'm not very sure. So, but of course, at the policy level as well, like what Dr. Gayathri was saying, even if these patients, and it is my understanding too, that often enough, patients who lack resources are not turned away. So I think that's, that's something that's encouraging, but of course more needs to be done. But again, it's an issue that requires detailed consideration and, and significant legal reform.
How do we rethink social protection for this group of people?
Right. So perhaps I just want to add on, Meera, if I may. I'm sorry. I just want to add on that we also have community psychiatry services where we actually go to the homes of the patients. So some of them really can't afford. Some of them have no support from anybody else. Many of them live on their own. And what we do is the community team. So there's one in every hospital, general hospital, and some of the smaller hospitals. We actually go to their homes and we actually deliver treatment there, whether it's injection or medications, monthly medications. And this is accompanied by the doctors. The doctors go, sometimes the specialists follow in, and we get the occupational therapists to follow. Sometimes if they need physiotherapy, we work with the physiotherapists. NGOs come with us as well. So we do that.
Are they open to it?
They are beginning to become more open to it. We had a lot of risk. I mean, there were a lot of, people were not very happy at the beginning. That was like about maybe 20 years ago. But I think people are more open to the concept. And the reason is, again, because of stigma. You see a van coming from the hospital. So those days it used to be, the maternity, bidan that comes. And so initially they used to say there's nobody who is pregnant here, nobody has delivered here. And then, they say, no, we are here to see other sickness. Because of confidentiality, we're not allowed to say. But, it's a village. The moment there's a hospital van, people come. And eventually, people know about it and so on and so forth. But now they're more receptive because they see that we're actually, working with them to help. So this has actually helped a lot of families and a lot of patients who are not able to come forward for treatment. We go there and we treat them.
Okay. Nisa Maris has a very good question. Nisa is saying Mental Health Act doesn't cover other areas than mental health issues reported on psychiatry services. What about general issues like anxiety and depression, which the Act should, refer to, but for NGOs who are interested to implement psychological support programs, is there any guidelines or a specific Act that they can refer to? Rama or Dato?
If I may, the Mental Health Act really is there for the treatment of patients who are in acute need of psychiatric treatment. You're talking about your schizophrenics, your severe depressive disorders, people who need to be admitted against their will, so to speak, so that they can receive compulsory treatment. And the Mental Health Act actually provides detailed provisions about how that should be done, the safeguards in place, and I'm sure that Suarn can elaborate in much more detail about those provisions and the safeguards. In terms of treating clinical conditions, you don't really need the Mental Health Act there. So in terms of in terms of initiatives like outreach programs to treat depression and anxiety, the Mental Health Act quite honestly is irrelevant. Of course, I stand corrected by Dr. Suarn, so perhaps you might want to chime in at this point.
Dato?
I think you are right. Rama, you are right. when you're going outreach program, you're talking about depression. My understanding is basically maybe, I mean, the question would be more like working on mental health promotion.
Yeah.
I think that is more important than we're talking rather than mental illness. For mental health, basically all of us, our mental health is quite dynamic. Sometimes we get angry, sometimes we, moods are a bit more higher than usual. Sometimes we just like to keep quiet. So I think the Ministry of Health has got some program on mental health promotion. I think quite a number of NGOs are aware of that. In the government side, the primary healthcare centers have been trained as staff to run some of these programs where they inoculate you. I call it inoculation because you inoculate you with skill, mental health skills, like how you build up your self-esteem, how you develop good communication skill, how sometimes when negative thoughts come in, you come positive thinking. There are good modules to handle all that. Problem solving skills and decision making, and also how to say no politely without hurting the other party. We call it assertiveness skills. So these are all actually mental health skills. So it ties up together with stress management, anger management, relaxation therapy. So these are important, I think, where the outreach can handle, and they will be very important in prevention of depression. In fact, in good studies have been done on suicide, especially in Western countries, especially in Scandinavia. They found just by implementing good mental health skills in adolescents and also recognizing depression, you treat these two, the rate of suicide comes down drastically. So mental health promotion is very important. And I think this is where we like to advocate. And the NGOs, you don't need the act at all. It doesn't, you can go off. And if you need the skill, maybe some of the Ministry of Health centers will be able to help out in training up on these life skills.
Okay. Anita Abu Bakar has a question. When will Malaysia ratify Article 15 of the UN CRPD? There is still a lot of coercion happening towards people with mental health disorders and a lack of empowering them and providing autonomy and liberty. With the ratification, it would and should help in changing the way things are being done in mental health care system in Malaysia. So what are your thoughts on that? Gayathri or Dato?
Dato, do you want to go on first, Dato?
I'll give you, Gayathri.
Okay, so we're talking about Article 15, freedom from torture, cruel or inhumane and degrading treatment or punishment, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that's a very difficult question for me to answer since I'm still in the, I think there's something that is more towards the government and legislation, right? Of course, I support that. I mean, inhuman treatment, for us, it's, we see how our patients are treated and we are not happy, we fight. I mean, I myself have fought with the police, I've fought with family members sometimes when we see how our patients are being treated. But, hands are tied. So we do whatever we can, we report to the welfare. And, if family members says like, we have patients whose family members come and just leave them in the hospitals and we just cannot reach out after that. We just can't, we keep calling them, they don't answer. We go to the houses, we send them, and sometimes they give us the wrong, telephone numbers, wrong addresses, and the patient is just left with us. So what we do is we work with the social welfare department and we actually find placements for these patients. Sometimes they stay with us long. I think, Dato, you will agree to this as well. I think, in the institution, we have more of those patients. So I would definitely agree that this, this be adopted in our country because we have no way actually sometimes to, how do we go and, seek justice for these people?
Dato, I know you led the Hospital Bahagia, am I correct? I've always been against institutionalization. Is that really the way forward, do you think?
Okay, I agree with you. Actually, I think Ministry of Health have done over the last many years now, deinstitutionalize it, or the care in mental hospitals. It all started off, if you look back historically, into 4 mental hospitals in Malaysia. The names are beautiful. Hospital Bahagia, be happy. Hospital Permai is supposed to be Johor, calm. Mesra in Sabah to be friendly. And we also have got one in Kuching, Sentosa. Okay? But fortunately, since 1970s, the process of decentralization started. It's a very long, slow process, and it took a lot of time from the ministry. Okay, current policy is clear. There's a lot of decentralization. As you see, that psychiatric hospitals are now opened up in all state hospitals. They've got psychiatric hospitals. A number of specialist hospitals that have come up, actually, with psychiatric inpatient care, outpatient care. They're supposed to provide community care. The law says once you have got a psychiatric hospital, you have to provide community care. The mental health act is clear on that. So it came a long way, right? And I think they're going in that direction. In fact, the aim, actually, final aim, is for institutions not to close down. You can't close down. These 4 institutions have become approved psychiatric hospitals under the law. That means basically for sending forensic patients, actually for assessment by the court under section 342 or 344 or 348, depending on how they come in to this. And also, maybe in near future, the aim of this institution is those who fail community care or fail care in the decentralized general hospitals, only then they go down to institutions. Institution is not the best place at all. And work here pretty long. The best place are still general hospitals and treatment in the community. As Gayathri rightly pointed out, treatment in the community is the way forward. And patients who are unwell, when they are not well, they can't take care of themselves. I think the law provides compulsory treatment. But once they are able to make decisions for themselves, I believe autonomy must be given to them.
Okay, we have one.
So we still.
We have comment from one of our participants who says deinstitutionalization will not work unless we have a good social or community support, in which case at present we don't. Would you agree?
I think we are in the way. The Act very clearly says communities, touching on community support. It touches on some of them may not need hospital care. They may need government, is a downsizing of the care from hospital to a nursing home and back into community. I think we are working towards that. Only thing that the Act doesn't have a compulsory community treatment order. So I think it will work, yes, but there is a will, there is a way. They need funding, and we can go forward. I think that's the best care. Treatment of mentally disordered person is best at home rather than in an institution.
Okay, I'm just going to go very quickly to the children because Dr. Amar has already touched on quite a lot of the issues. I just have one question. We have the Convention of the Rights of the Child. We have the Child Act 2001. Where in these legislation or conventions is the child protected from mental health?
I didn't answer I didn't get the whole question because there was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Meera, I lost you in the last part.
Sure. So for the children, we have the Convention of the Rights of the Child. We have the Child Act 2001. When it comes to our children's mental health, where in terms of legislation do we need to strengthen it? Or is it not the legislation, it's just us and how it's enforcement at the end of the day? Rama or Farah, do you want to take this one?
May I? Yeah, I think if you look at the Mental Health Act, there are provisions about minors, yeah? So the definition of who should take care of the child is definitely the parents, or the definition here is guardian. Guardian is person who having care and custody of the child. So it could be adoptive parent, or by law you are, or by way of a will, the guardian is appointed by the will of the parents. So I think when you talking about mental health, the Mental Health Act itself is quite broad to actually address almost everyone. Yeah, it even have it even have the definition of a friend who is not a next of kin, right? So basically, they can't protect themselves as far as children are concerned. So who should protect them? the adults who are the guardians, and perhaps the friend for young adolescent patients, you know. So I think we could use the mental health act. It's not the best, but I think I think it's there for us to take them for treatment. We can actually volunteer, they can go in, we can take, I mean, the parent actually, the guardian can actually bring the child over. Am I right, doctors?
Actually, there are 3 persons under the act.
Dato, just 1 minute. What if the parent or the guardian or whoever is the enemy? What do you do then?
Okay, I think this is where I said you have to look at the Mental Health Act in various perspectives. The way I see it, right? It also serves to for us to help the victim, the abused, and also to help the abuser. So if you know a parent who is ill-treating a child, or abusing the child, or neglecting the child, I think the neighbor, it is incumbent already, okay? It becomes compulsory for someone who see this act to actually make a report. Number one, that could be a penal matter, yeah, a criminal matter. Or on the other hand, if you see that the abuser, who is a parent, who are suffering from themselves from these issues, I think we as a community have the responsibility to actually send them in for rehabilitation. So we cannot say, I think this community thing is a very important thing. I believe in it, you know. In my neighborhood, we all look out for each other. In my previous neighborhood, somebody who leave their gates unclosed, the neighbors will start calling you like, why is your gate not closed? So I think we have to encourage this, particularly in the COVID it's very COVID times or lockdown times, you know, it's very, very challenging, irrespective of where you come from. You could be in Bukit Damansara, you could be in Jalan Perkelile. It does not matter whether you're B40 or not. It affects you. I think mental health does not discriminate anyone.
Dato, your input, sorry.
Yeah, I think if it's a minor child, the child act comes into play still, right? A child act comes into play to take care if you find that the abuser, there are issues, especially if a guardian is an abuser, as you go forward, right? Because the mental health only touches on if there are any issues for a child with mental disorder, then the guardian comes in, right? It got 3 terms. One is guardian, the other one is friend, as pointed out. Friend, you must stay under the same roof for 2 years.
Yeah.
And there are certain areas that you can touch on. And the third one is a relative. So these terms come out in different parts of the act where they can be used. A friend can't be brought in for admission purpose for compulsory, very clear. It's only the guardian
and the relative.
Or a minor or a relative.
Rama,
the law. Friend can come in under different parts.
Sure. Rama, obviously there are gaps in the law when it comes to children. What are they?
I think the Child Act, to be honest, is quite a comprehensive act. It is quite what do you call it? It's quite a broad and overarching piece of legislation, and I think it was introduced in 2001, and it has been enforced for some time now. So I think if you're asking me in terms of gaps, insofar as children are concerned, I think I don't think more legislation is necessarily the answer. I think it's more about having the right policy frameworks in place, and in terms of making sure that the Child Act is properly enforced.
Okay, so it's just enforcement then. Okay, very quickly, we have very little time left, and this I know is Dato's area in which I would love to hear his input. People in detention centers and prisons. We've heard Tan Sri Lamtai talk about how our prisons and detention centers are almost sounds like it's dangerously overcrowded. Dato, what are ways in which we can reform this system so that we don't have issues like overcrowding at the moment?
See, they can't get away, as Chansey pointed out. Occupancy level 131%. Foreigners about almost a quarter, 1/5 of them, 20%. Population is building up, total institutions 52, and no wonder good culture for setting up a COVID-19 area in these overcrowded areas. And forget about currently, even prior to COVID, mental illness was overrepresented in the prison. Very clearly pointed out by world, in fact, it's not a problem only in Malaysia, it's a worldwide problem. Unfortunately, our Malaysian prison department has got no official data on mental health in prison. The only data we can pick up is basically some of the studies conducted by the master's trainee in prisons on these prisoners, and all of them show very high prevalence of mental illness. A good summary of this is done by actually in a journal of psychiatry, British Journal of Psychiatry, where they look back at almost 20 different countries worldwide, and they found that overall prevalence was high from the community compared to the community. As far as psychotic illness was concerned, it was about almost 4%, and major depression in prison was about almost 12%. Well, prisons again have got very poor medical services, right? So the access to this care, I think, need to be relooked at. Though under the law, there is provision that the Director General of Prison can send these patients for treatment to psychiatric hospital under Section 37 of the Prisons Act. But unfortunately, in my personal experience working in Hostel Bahagia, very few come. Very few have access to that. So the law is there. Implementation is poor. Similarly, the regulations, prison regulations that have come out have got two very important areas which are not being implemented well. One is for long-term prisoners. Actually, by law, every 4 years, they have to send prison department, with the help of a registered medical practitioner, have to send a report of every prisoner's mental health and physical health to the Young Putarago. To best of my knowledge, I don't think so it's been done. Otherwise, you'll be getting referrals from this area. And number two, again, every prisoner who get admitted into the prison have to have a full physical and also mental health checkup, which again, they don't have expertise there. So I think these laws may be there, but implementation is poor. That need to be looked at the prison. And in terms of COVID, is problem.
Yeah, let's talk about overcrowding. Is there a way in bringing relief to the system?
I think overcrowding, they must look at, if you see the total remand prisoners currently, they are about 25% are remand prisoners in a prison. I was looking back at prison department data. This is August 2020. So as I think we read in the social media about minor offenses, which are not criminal in nature. I don't, this is my personal feeling, they shouldn't be remanded. I think even the prison authorities have requested the courts on this area. So I think I'm not sure how to tackle this issue, but there's others who are in prison, which are available offenses. They are kept there. I mean, the law is such, I'm not sure the lawyers would be better, worse, how to assist this group. They're definitely overcrowding. You cannot, and then the number of foreigners are almost about 1/5 in the prisons. How to bring down the population? Easy way, you can say build more prisons? No, I don't think that's the answer.
Why immigration detainees? Why is it corporal punishment? I mean, can we just look at it as an administrative problem and look at repatriation instead? Why do we, isn't it burdening the system unnecessarily?
I should ask Farah or Rama to answer the question.
Because they amended the Immigration Act some years ago to and basically made it a whole lot more punitive with a view towards deterring the problem of illegal immigration and people overstaying their work permits and whatnot. But as you said, it is an administrative issue. So, you know, perhaps they should look into amending the Immigration Act. But of course, will that cause I mean, others would argue that would have a knock-on effect in terms of encouraging more people to overstay and worsen the problem of illegal immigrants. So, there's no easy answer to the question, I suppose.
Okay, so when it comes to relief to the system, there's really no immediate answers at the moment. Are you saying, Dato?
I think it's difficult to answer a question like that.
Okay.
And you make me feel helpless sometimes.
This entire session has made me feel helpless. I'm going to conclude very quickly. If you have parting words before we end, Gayathri, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you, Meera. Thank you for this session. I think it's very, I hope this has helped to enlighten, a few things. But I think when it comes to mental health and mental illness, it has to be an effort top down and down to the top. It has to be at a community level. Community, I think we need to understand that mental illness is an illness just like any other illness, just like physical illness. And our patients should not be discriminated just because they behave funny and they talk funny. They have the right, just as anybody else, to enjoy everything that is due to them. So, work with us, be with us, don't stigmatize us either. And that's it.
Yep. Rama.
There's an urgent need for the introduction of a Mental Capacity Act. And I didn't have the opportunity to address this earlier, but very quickly, we need a Vulnerable Persons Act as well to deal with vulnerable adults who need assistance within the community. Perhaps a topic for discussion at another point.
Okay, Farah.
I can only echo Dr. Gayathri and Mr. Rama's comments. But of course, I would like to say that, the principles of protecting persons with mental health, mental illness, and also the vulnerable people, these are principles that should be should be applied without discrimination, irrespective of social status, ethnicity. So I think we should look at it, because I just want to comment one thing about the Mental Health Act. It has got, it allows anyone to go to any hospital. If there's government hospital, right? There's also the private system. So yeah, it's really open to anyone. So do not stigmatize it.
Hey, Farah, I think you are right. The Mental Health Act is good in a way. It even allows you to go to private hospitals to seek help, even though they are not psychiatric hospitals. It allows you, right? But it also specify what you mean by psychiatric hospitals, and what you mean by what you mean by psychiatric nursing home and psychiatric community mental health centers, right? But it doesn't stop you from seeking help from anywhere, from your GP, you can get admitted to Pantai for your depression, no problem. Don't need to be a psychiatric hospital. So I think that's a good thing.
Okay.
It's under Section 8. If you look back.
Vulnerable communities, Dato, vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
They aim in their, in their list. Dato, your parting words. Would you have a message? Dato?
Yeah.
Do you want to conclude or say something before we leave?
I think mental health is important. And especially, I think seeking help is very important for mental health. People do not want to talk, as pointed out by Gayathri, so the stigma is there. I think it did change. And if you have a mental illness, then I think treatment options available now are good. Either in a private, in the government setting also. The process of accessibility actually is there. But though the COVID has affected some of the priorities of services, but still, I don't think it stopped anyone who have got depression, who feel there's a change in behavior. We forget that sometimes in COVID, it also, when people get isolation, they start taking alcohol, drugs a bit more. The change in behavior, irritability, I think go to the nearest health center. You don't, in fact, health centers, you don't even have to pay. So the B40 group should have, and the accessibility is there. There are so many health centers near home. And if there is a need, actually, health centers are trained actually to do screening. They use actually the DAS screening. And if there's a need for further specialist care, they do refer. So I think the important message is this. When we were looking at mental illness about 20 years ago or 30, 40 years ago, it was different. I was shocked when I first went to hospital Bahagia in 1980. I wanted to run away. But I didn't know I will end up as a director later on. But I think care have changed. We must change our mindset and get the stigma off.
Okay. There is a silent, thank you. There's a silent mental health crisis lurking. That is for sure. All I can say is we really need to get our act together. Thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts with us. That was Dato Suarn Singh, Dr. Gayathri, Kumarasuriar, Farah, Deba, Mohamed, Sofian, and Ramakrishna, Tharini. Thank you guys for being a part of this panel. I'm going to now pass the session over to Datin Anit for the closing speeches. I apologize that we've taken 10 minutes off the time, but over to you, Datin Anit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meera. Thank you.
Thank you, Meera.
Closing. Thank you. On behalf of the MLSM Exco, we would like to thank all the speakers. I would name them today: the Tan Sri Lee Lam Tai, Dr. Rajban Singh, Charlene Murray, Goh Swee Lin, YB Senator Rasadi Baradzi, Dr. Amar Singh, Meera Sivasothy, Dr. Suarn Singh, Farah, Deba, Mohamed Sofian, Dr. Gayathri, and Ramakrishna, Tharini. Thank you for the enlightening sessions today. A special thanks also to our brilliant moderators and those who spoke at part 1 of Speaking for the Unspoken. Another special gratitude to our IT support provided by Sean Delamo and Co. I don't know about all of you, but I gained tremendously, not just from today, but from the first part held last month. You know, when we were thinking about Speaking for the Unspoken, we wanted to just bring about the thoughts of the vulnerable population, and with COVID-19, it just escalated. I can do no better but to quote the words of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she said, and I quote, "If you want to be a true professional, you shall do something outside yourself, something to repair tears in your community. One lives not just for oneself, but for one's community," unquote. As a Malaysian, I've always been proud of how communities come together in times of crisis, regardless of race, ethnicity, and they genuinely help. COVID-19 was no different. I think the trend today has been that we need more community support. In the quest to leave no one behind, MLSM has started this series, and I hope it has planted a seed of compassion in every one of you and a bit more awareness of what goes on the ground. We thank you for your time, and there are a few housekeeping announcements before I hand over to Mr. Dinesh Bhaskaran. Firstly, the slides and the recordings of today's sessions are going to be made available subject to the consent of all the speakers today. When we get all the consent, they will be uploaded on our MLSM website. So you would wait out for that. Secondly, there were a lot of Q&As. We thank you. We thank you for your participation. To have over 200 participants stay right till the end is amazing. Thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. And we apologize for not being able to deal with all the Q&A due to shortage of time. We shall hope to address it somehow and hope with your support that we may have a sequel to this as well. Finally, for those who would like to claim the MMA CPD points, could you please email your full name, MMC registration number, and your place of and your IC number to the following address. All in small letters, cpd@mlsm.com.my. Our secretariat will forward it on. I repeat, cpd@mlsm.com.my. Finally, the pandemic is far from over. Let's work together to leave no one behind. Terima kasih, and it gives me great pleasure now to invite Mr. Dinesh Bhaskaran, MLSM past president and senior partner of Mrs. Sean Delamo & Co., our IT platform sponsor for today, to say a few words and close this event. Mr. Dinesh, up to you.
Thank you, Anit, for that. You know, the MLSM was formed 33 years ago. I don't think we've ever had a series of events like we've had this year. And it is really heartening to see the MLSM moving in the direction of community support. Because for years, it's been an association that has brought together lawyers and doctors to understand the intricacies of the interplay between the two professions. But COVID has taught us we're all part of a much, much wider community. And it gives me tremendous pride to see the evolution of the society this year. Look, we have 200 participants still on, and it's 6:30 in the evening. Yeah. So all I can say is this: congratulations to the MLSM president, Venu. You've done a fantastic job with your committee. This is a great initiative. Thank you to all the participants. And I think this will be just the second of a tremendous series that's going to go on, not just this year, but also next and beyond that. On that note, I would like to declare this event formally closed. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.